Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today for the Elcom and Flare webinar, Building Engagement and Loyalty with your frontline and remote workforce. Really excited to be joined today by Dan Cohen from Flare, and it's a great topic and one that I think a lot of people have been thinking about over the last 18 months, so we're really excited to be discussing it today. For those that aren't familiar with GoToWebinar, on the right-hand side, you should have a chat question area, so feel free to jump in there and type in any questions. At the end, we'll answer as many as possible and get back to you if we don't get through to yours, but please feel free to jump in and type questions as we go forward. Just as a quick introduction, my name is Josh Anstey. I'm the Customer Solutions Director at Elcom, and as mentioned, really excited to be joined by Daniel Cohen, co-founder and managing director at Flare HR.
Great to be here, Josh, and thank you for the introduction. I think this is a really interesting webinar, and one that I think is particularly topical as we emerge in New South Wales and hopefully Victoria as well out of lockdown, because there's a lot of changes that are happening in the space. I'll hand it over to you, Josh.
Awesome, no, 100% agree. So we've got a jam-packed agenda today. We're going to start off by looking at recruiting and retaining through rewarding loyalty and success. We'll then jump in and look at flexible working models and fostering a shared vision and engaging those hard-to-reach employees. Dan and I will then have a fireside chat around the how. So we'll look there at practical digital tools that will improve the daily lives of deskless employees and also delivering that authentic, personalized experiences for all employees at scale. We'll then touch on a quick case study and finish up with Q&A there. So a really jam-packed agenda. Hopefully there'll be some great information that everyone's going to find really interesting and useful. To start, I'll hand over to you, Dan.
Cool. So I think this is an interesting slide, and we wanted to kick off really with not only some information and some guidance that we've learned over the last 18 months, but bake that in the data that exists. And this is a fascinating study done by BCG. There's two major themes that hopefully you guys have been reading in the news, which are scary topics, but at the same time create enormous opportunities for us to really change the way work is done. And these opportunities are probably once in a century, or as they say, once in a pandemic cycle that kind of present themselves. And those two themes, the future of work and the great resignation, are probably overused kind of nomenclature, but nevertheless are real, and they are here today. The future of work is something that's been spoken about with robotics and automation over the course of the last 5 years. And it was something that was envisaged to be iterative, to kind of by 2030 or 2040, a futurist would talk, what does the future of work look like? And at the same time, the great resignation is something that's come into the print and into the media in the last few weeks and months as we emerge out of lockdowns, as we kind of deal with life in a pandemic environment. What's going to happen to people? And when you combine these two things together, you get almost the explosion of the future is now. It's a fascinating kind of case study that when we look back, we're going to look at 2019, 20, and 21 as formative years in the way that people work and act within society. And the data supports this. If you look at this BCG study done very, very recently, they really went in and examined this notion of what's happening in our working lives. What we're seeing is that explosion, or that once in a millennium event of 36% of the global workforce were laid off. And so what is the impact? What does that mean to society 12, 18, 24 months later? And you're seeing that in the recruitment and the retaining stats that you see on the right-hand side of that chart. 56% of people right now are actively looking for a job, right? Whether that be today or whether that be in the next 12 months, 56% of the workforce, your workforce, are currently having a look at what's out there for them. That's higher exponentially than it's ever been before. And on the retention side, or the retraining side of things, 68% of your workforce are willing to actually retrain to look for a new job, which is a fascinating statistic when it comes to engagement. Lastly, two other themes that have emerged through this lockdown period is that employees, staff, partners want more. What they want is a flexible working environment as well as remuneration and incentive, a flexible environment in when they work and a flexible environment in the way and where they work. And lastly, culture and values important than it ever has before. Our staff want to start identifying not just with the paycheck, but with the social mission of the company at the same time. And so when you look at these kind of 5 boxes in terms of off the chart statistics in every category in the changing nature and the future of work, and it's upon us today, what are kind of some of the tools that leaders have to embrace and deal with not only these challenges, but these huge opportunities in the way that we construct workforce? That's what we're going to talk to you about today. If you look at the next slide, Josh, what we've got is the EVP. Now, the employee value proposition has always been at the center of the employee journey. Whether you be an Elcom customer or a Flare customer or someone interested in this space, you've always thought about the EVP as center to how you kind of articulate and drive your HR strategy. But 2 things generally came first, and that was the automation of your systems and the compliance side of your HR department. Not anymore. Today, the EVP has become a need to have, not a nice to have, not only in terms of the design of your strategy, but the execution of it at the same time. Because if you want to be on the right side of the ledger of those 5 thematics that we spoke about on the previous page, it's critical that we deliver today on the EVP. What are the 5 tools that are available to leaders that people want in today's society? This is what was examined by BCG through the surveys that they did. The first came up as rewards. Compensation, benefits, and recognition for work is still the #1 pillar in terms of what employees are looking for in this new environment. But what crept up associated with the pandemic was a new working model. Flexibility was at the core of what people wanted. 76% of employees, as we said they wanted flexibility in the way and when they work. Other things, culture being a really kind of important part of aligning with the mission and the values, the diversity elements associated with team and the affiliation with co-workers are all really important tools that we have at our disposal to deal with the challenges of this total dislocation of the labor market as we return to work, rehire, and get into a regular cadence. Let's turn over to the next slide and have a look at a couple of these things in terms of recruitment and retraining, as well as through those flexible models that BCG has spoken about. I'll start with recruiting and retaining, and this is an interesting piece of data that BCG found that 41% of employees saw a decrease in their overall well-being during the pandemic. That's not surprising. What you see over here is huge mental stress loads, huge financial stress loads, but even the physical side of just dealing and multitasking through the responsibilities that we have during the pandemic has taken an enormous emotional toll on everyone right throughout. So these statistics, the notion that 41% of our well-being has declined during the pandemic at work, kind of makes sense. The question is how do we ensure that that doesn't prevent the state that we're in now, the huge churn that is predicted associated with the Great Resignation? Remember, 56% of us are actively looking for a job in the next 12 months. And so this connectivity between well-being and retention and engagement is particularly important over the next 12 months when it comes to leadership and the way employees want to be engaged at work. If we can get this part right, this factor of balance between work, life, social, mental, physical, and financial well-being and health, that's the big difference that we can make over the next 12 months to prevent the Great Resignation from happening in our companies and maximize our EVP when it comes to recruitment. That's one thing that we really need to focus on. And in the Q&A kind of section or the fireside section, we'll talk about the how. The second big part on this next slide really did a survey associated with what are the 10 things that are important to people in this new aged world, in this changing environment. And unsurprisingly, the traditional things came up of rewards, pay, benefits, and recognition, but flexibility went right up that chart to number 2 as the second most important thing when it came to driving the retention and recruitment of talent. And so we're going to talk a little bit about flexibility in and how we engage kind of this notion of hybrid workforces and incorporate the wellness strategy into that to maximize our chance of success as leaders deal with new tools, new challenges, and new opportunities post a pandemic world. Josh, next slide. I think I'm going to, on this next slide, Josh, hand over to you and really talk through the notion of flexible working models and how we can foster this kind of engaging and vision-aligned kind of strategy and notion to access employees when they're not all in our office, when we kind of have a look at the fact that the majority of people are going to go into this hybrid working environment of work and home. How do we engage those hard-to-reach employees?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Dan. And I think the statistics you had there are awesome and really hit home, with everyone to show how important this is. And I think you're right. I think fostering that shared vision and engaging hard to reach employees is really important to ensure, obviously, staff retention, as you've spoken about, and most importantly, you're creating an environment that actually enables everyone to do their best work. Which I think ultimately that's going to help lead to that better customer experience, better user experience, and just a better business and organization. Your employees and team, they want that seamless access to everything they need to perform their roles. They want that purpose and meaning, which you've spoken about their work, and obviously feel that they're part of something special. And if you do want to keep your workforce engaged, obviously avoid that, the big mouth resignation everyone's been talking about. You really need to keep them connected to the business, to each other, and to resources. I think the last 18 months have been that real wake-up call for those office or head office team members who sometimes they forgot and unintentionally about those frontline and remote staff. They're in head office, they were seeing each other all the time. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and they accidentally forgot about what that experience is like for everyone else. But now that everyone's in that same boat, so that shared experience of working remote or hybrid work, everyone started to really think, hey, well, what about frontline and remote teams, and how do we support them? How do we engage with them? And how do we make sure that they feel part of the organization? Again, BCG had that really interesting study and looked at what they saw there, which was 76% of employers were looking for that added flexibility in where they work. And obviously leaders need to embrace that. And I think there's a whole bunch of different areas to focus on. Some of the key ones that BCG had flagged and mentioned there is obviously the digital fluency and the tools that you're going to be using, and making sure you're providing those resources. So, that makes sense. Obviously, provide those resources, make sure people can access the information they need as and when they want to, but also align that with that in-person team time so that you can work on collaborative activities together. The nature of being remote and not being in the same office together, or thinking about frontline staff where they don't all see each other at the same time. How do you set each other up for success and have that combination between when you're doing something together and you're going to collaborate remotely, and then you're going to have that asynchronous work you're going to be doing when it's not necessarily at the same time or not all in one go. And the other big thing is when you're putting these tools in place is how they're actually used, and building that muscle memory and having the daily process of knowing this is where I use this tool, this is where I use that tool, this is the scenario. So a lot of that's around the rules of engagement and the governance and having those tools in place. And finally, the other big point they mentioned was around tracking the metrics and rewarding success. And there's no point putting something in place if you're not going to track it, if you're not going to measure it and see whether it's working for your team and whether it's been successful. So some really interesting statistics there and theories around those models. Yeah, I want to go back to one of the points I mentioned earlier, which was connecting employees to resources, especially when you think about frontline workforces and remote team members. A real big key area there is centralizing knowledge. So when you're in the office, you're so used to walking past someone's desk or quickly having a chat in the office kitchen or grabbing a coffee to get information, get knowledge, get answers you need. Obviously, when you're remote and when you are frontline, much harder to get access to the information you need and that knowledge. So having centralized knowledge bases and places where people can go store and share their knowledge, and other users can quickly search and find that information and that knowledge is really, really important. Another big one's around digitizing processes. So I think everyone's really realized that paper-based process you dealt with in the office because you were all together is just not practical anymore, or something that's lots of emails is really inefficient. So how can I digitize that process to help employees get access to the resources they need, whether it's filling in online forms or accessing policies and procedures, but it's really important, especially with frontline staff, that you've digitized those processes. Integrating systems is another real key one. Every organization is going to have a whole list of different systems and solutions that people need to do their job in different ways. And it's about how do you bring that together into a centralized employee experience that they're integrated, they're together. You as the user don't have to feel lost of trying to remember where you go do what, having that central digital destination almost from an employee perspective to access the information and resources you need. And the final one I mentioned there around connecting employees to resources around accessibility and making it accessible. And there's a few different ways to look at accessibility. I think looking at frontline workforces, you're looking at how you support them. Mobile access is obviously really important. They're very often, you just with a mobile device, maybe a tablet, don't have a computer or a desktop that they're sitting in front of or working, or a laptop even. And also accessibility from an inclusion perspective. And there's a whole bunch of accessibility guidelines to support different people from the vision perspective and a whole range of areas. I think that's really important around having an inclusive environment. And you obviously mentioned that, Dan, earlier, where people want to feel connected to the organization and the mission. And there's that social connection to what you're doing as well. I think being inclusive and having accessible solutions is really important there. The next one's around connecting employees to the business. And so from that perspective, we're looking at, how do you get direct managers on board with this? It's definitely not something that happens in a silo. It's not only top down, not only bottom up, but you really need to have all managers on board with what that strategy is, how you're implementing tools to support the remote work and frontline workforces, and make sure those managers are on board to actually help, drive that home, implement it, support it, and ensure its success. I think timely, transparent information is really important, especially when you think about frontline workforces and you think about remote team members, where if you're not together, you can't all catch up, have a quick chat, bring everyone together in a meeting room in an office or something like that. So it's really important to think, how can I get people the information they need in a timely and a transparent way, in a really efficient way for us from an office perspective. And that's going to help you as a business to be able to communicate a unified vision. And when you think about your frontline workforce, often they're the ones that are customer facing, whether they're retail, whether they're nurses or in aged care, whether they're in construction. There's so many different areas of healthcare. There's so many areas where the frontline workforce is essentially the one that deals with the customer or the patient or the end user or the member, or if you're a not-for-profit, for example. And it's really important that they understand the vision and the mission of the organization so that they can communicate that. And the last point around connecting employees to the business is making it easy to give feedback. And again, I think that whole key area around your employee retention and engagement is where everyone feels heard, that they feel they've got the ability to provide feedback. It's actually listened to and it's acted on, and they've got transparency and visibility around that. So I think it's really important to make it very easy to get that feedback, and also it gives you that temperature check and helps you keep the pulse on how things are tracking in the organization. And the third component to look at is connecting employees to each other. And I think the organizations are great at creating formal spaces where it might be an area where you collaborate around a specific project, or you're in a certain team or department, or you're working with a specific client. But it's just as important to create those informal spaces where people can have that conversation, have that chat, have the water cooler discussion, which you might have used to have in the office, and now everyone's realizing we're remote, we need to be able to have that in some shape or form. And what about our great team members who are on the front line? How do we create that experience and create that environment for them? Recognizing success is a big one. I know Dan will talk about this a little bit more, but obviously enabling employees to recognize each other and recognize success of each other, give each other the kudos on the pat on the back there and help celebrate each other's successes from a peer perspective, but obviously from an organization perspective. And the last one I'll mention there is to actively promote connection. So it's really hard to have that connection, that social connection that you used to have if you are in the office. So how do you actually provide an experience for users to be able to have that connection? And it also keeps you closer to your team members, it keeps you close to the organization, where you actually feel that you know the people you're working with. And, again, very hard to have that if you're not all going for coffee or having a lunch break together. But really important to look at creating an environment and a place where you can actually have that connection in the organization. So we're going to get everyone to jump in over here and quickly run a poll. And I'm going to put a poll on the screen here for everybody. And so hopefully I have launched that successfully, and that hopefully is on everyone's screens there. But we've got a poll there, which we'd love everyone to jump in and answer. The question is, what is the most pressing challenge you're facing with your frontline workforce? And there's a few different options there. So if everyone wants to jump in and answer those, employee retention, employee engagement, frontline manager engagement, personalized communication, and access to resources. So it'd just be really interesting to understand everyone on the webinar today, what are the key challenges you're dealing with and that you're trying to actually help to improve connecting with your frontline workforce, and think of it also as your remote workforce as well.
Josh, you got some Jeopardy music loaded up while we fill that
Yeah, I know exactly. I should have I need that background music over there to build the suspense or the anticipation there. We've got nearly everyone voting, but yes, I definitely need that. Give me about 10 more seconds. I like watching the stats jump in there as everyone starts to do those. So if anyone hasn't voted, you want to jump in and quickly vote now, and I'll close off the poll right now. All right, let's close that here. Oh, another quick one came through there. Okay, let me close off the poll now. Perfect. I'll share the stats. If we want to have a quick look, we can have a quick chat about those. All right. So they're the stats that came through from the poll. So yeah, quite interesting to see, in terms of the votes that came through.
I think let's leverage off that in terms of employee engagement and access to resources being the two leading themes over there, Josh. And maybe you and I can talk about that a little bit further in a bit of a fireside now.
That sounds good. All right, let me put that poll, hide that poll. Whoop. Got to make sure I press the right buttons. Perfect. There you go. Too easy.
So yeah, so perfect timing, Josh. Funny how that happens. But, we talk about accessing resources as one of the major themes that is challenging our audience today. And I think Elcom's been doing this now for many, many years. The pandemic and this new future of work is really a stimulus to the work that Elcom's been doing in providing those digital tools that really do engage employees and provide those access to resources that people are looking for. I think before we even get into tooling and digital capability, where does one even start on this journey? I mean, if historically you've been predominantly a face-to-face organization, and I want to kind of say, hey, there's a new way of work and I need to be on that journey, where do I even start, Josh?
Yeah, so it's a good question there. And I think the big thing is you start understanding who your audience is. So, and the only way to do that is to actually speak to your team, your frontline and your remote staff to find out what's important to them. And I think what's really important is to understand what will help them feel connected to the organization, important and valued. So again, you spoke about that before, Dan. I think it's really important to understand what appeals to them, what's going to make them feel connected and part of the business. And obviously from a practical perspective, what can help them do their job more efficiently. And so it's really important to look at how you streamline some simple processes and help remove inefficiencies in the organization. That can go a really long way. And so if you do solve some of those really basic problems, I think you're really going to help increase their loyalty and their happiness. So yeah, I agree. I think before you jump into actually implementing everything, have a chat to everyone. Best way to find out what they actually need, and that'll help you work out what to do next.
Right. And so access to resources obviously came across as the major theme over there. What are some of the new tools that a company might consider in kind of providing that access? I mean, the world has changed from a paper-based, manual kind of in-person process to a digital, decentralized, and highly scalable kind of use of tools. What are some of the tools, or what are some of the new kind of things that are coming up that companies are using to really drive engagement and democratize access?
Yeah, so look, there's a ton. Obviously, it's a really exciting space. It's an exciting time to be in the space as well. Obviously, things like intranets and digital workplaces and rewards and benefits platforms are front and center of that. They really become that central place and that go-to to be able to bring everyone together and have that central, a place to access your rewards and benefits, and having an intranet there to know that this is the one-stop shop, the place I go, that digital workplace there, that single pane of glass, and this is how I access what I need in the organization and where I go to feel connected and communicate. So, I think those are some of the key tools. I think what's really important though is finding that balance of putting something in place now that's going to solve those current challenges and problems and the feedback people mention, like getting access to resources and information, but also setting yourself up for success and putting a solution in place that won't just meet your needs today, but can actually scale and grow with you down the line. So I think there's so many different types of tools to put in place. I think as a business, once you understand what everyone wants to do and how you're going to solve their needs and problems, is putting something in place that doesn't just solve today, but sets you up for success. And this is something that you're going to be able to build your business on for the next 6, 12, 24, 36 months in such a rapid changing place.
Yeah, you talk about those foundations for success, and I think it's an important one. I mean, Elcom's been leading the intranet and the digital tools space now for the last decade or so, and you would have seen, I assume, multiple successes, but also multiple failures in the digitalization of process and the democratization of access. What are kind of the big kind of tips if someone about to start this journey or going on the journey at the moment? What are some of the tips for success that you've seen in your career?
Yeah, I think we've obviously seen a lot, and it's really interesting and exciting, and so many different organizations of different sizes, different stages of the process. Yeah, I think a real big thing and a big tip for success is having that roadmap of how you're actually going to phase out delivering that employee experience. So, focus on those basics, but obviously remember to include key areas and items such as things like personalization, integration, and also thinking about that idea of a single source of truth. When you start doing this, you'll suddenly realize you have the same piece of information or policy or procedure or whatever it might be in so many different places, and bringing that together in a single source of truth is really important in setting yourself up for success. And I always say it's really important to ask everyone for their ideas and their opinions, because you want to make everyone feel included. You want to bring them on the journey, but you're going to get a million different answers. And so I think it's really important to let your team know that you're putting something in place that is dynamic, it's going to evolve, it's going to have multiple phases, it's a living, breathing solution, and that employee experience is going to always improve, and it's going to be getting better and changing. But you need, you need the right foundation in place, and you obviously need to bring everyone on that journey to make it successful. But let everyone know that it's a phased approach, and obviously you're not going to be able to do everything on day one.
Yeah, we've seen a similar thing at Flare, whereby our mission and vision has been to help every Australian worker live their best life, and with that, well-being has been at the centre of delivery. The responsibility has almost shifted to the employer to deliver that employee value proposition centered around well-being. But if you can't amalgamate that under a central source of truth, then it's really, really hard to deliver the experience that you're looking for. So I think that's a really good tip and a foundation for success, which is create those centralized roadmaps, engage your audience, being your employees as your stakeholders or your customers, in what you want to deliver, and then kind of go out about digitalizing those processes for scale. I think it's great tips, Josh, and certainly something that we've seen at Flare.
Yeah, and I think just on that point you mentioned about Flare, and obviously I love the tagline and slogan there, which is great. And I think when looking at the experience, Flare's had with organizations, a lot of people, when they sort of want to live their best life, a lot of that it becomes about what is that experience they're actually having. And I think, we look at the sort of next section of the fireside chat around delivering authentic, personalized experiences for all employees at scale. I think it actually leads really nicely into that. Can you share, Dan, I guess, what personalization means for businesses, and, especially in that context of the employees and their rewards and benefits and that level of employee engagement?
Yeah, so well-being is an often talked about theme, right? That every HRD or CEO or business leader wants to deliver for their employees. It's really, as I said, at the center of the EVP. But kind of delivery of well-being as a nice to have versus a need to have are two fundamentally different things. And what is the difference between nice to have and need to have is this concept of tailored journeys, of personalized journeys for employees. So how does one do that? How does one really kind of personalize the journey to every employee, given that every employee, partner, or worker is different? And the answer comes into something that you said, Josh, in terms of data. Data is so important to understand our employees and make sure that they're not just a number, that they're a person with different needs and wants. And so if we can centralize that data in a singular place, that's the foundation of personalization. But you need to do more than just have the data in a central place. What then you need to do is be able to add context for that tailored journey, such that you're not only delivering personalized journeys, but you're delivering those personalized journeys at important moments in time to that employee. So context is another particularly important a factor in the overall personalization or tailoring of that employee journey. And so when you've got kind of that asset of data, you marry it with context, and last, you have this trusted relationship between employer and employee. That's when the magic of well-being can actually happen and move from a nice to have theme on the back of an envelope or poster when you're recruiting an individual to the delivery right through the employee life cycle and on the journey. So for me, that's what personalization actually means, rather than just something out of a textbook that BCG wrote.
Yeah, I like the definition, the way you put that, and I think that's it's really important because it is unique to the person, and those stages it does obviously change. It actually leads me to the next question I was going to ask, which is how do you actually start personalizing those experiences? And I think the big thing, which you just sort of touched on a little bit, but it'd be great to elaborate on, Dan, which is to actually do that personalization, but in a way that actually feels authentic and maybe
Yeah,
doesn't feel automated. How do you do that?
it's a good point. So I'd split this up into probably the front end and the back end. At the back end, by centralizing that data set on that individual, be it age, stage, preferences, likes, dislikes, etc. Once I've got that data and I can deliver it at contextual moments in time, that's the back end infrastructure that's required for a personalized journey. But you're right, Josh. The third component, and I called it trust before, is about authenticity and the way that that's delivered. And just like hybrid workforces, you have working at home and working in person or working in the office. Authenticity is something, and sincerity is something that's delivered by humans at the end of the day. So you can have all the digital tools, you can have all the data and all the context, but the delivery at the moment is omni-channel. That delivery has to be both by the individual or the manager or the leader, combined with the digital tools to get that authentic, personalized, customized journey or tailored journey. So that's the how.
Yeah, I like that over there. And then I guess actually to extend that even more when you think about doing that, I think a lot of organizations will look at putting something in place, and I'm sure you see this with clients of Flare that are growing where they want to put something in place right now, but that big question is, they may have hundreds or thousands of staff or growing to that level of frontline employees, and how do they actually do that at scale?
And I think, look, that's the beauty of digitalization and technology. The reason why this hasn't been possible historically is we didn't have the digital tools accessible that we have today. It's how we use those tools. And so doing something at scale is only about repeating the thing that is done at an individualized unit level. Technology is the key answer to that, is being able to take what was previously only being able to done one-to-one and expand it exponentially to being done one to many. That's the beauty of digital communication. That's the beauty of the tool set. But you need the foundations in place, that single central source of truth to compile the data and then leverage it for the contextual moments in time to deliver it authentically at scale.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And I think just to give a plug to Flare there, I think it's something you do in a really really nice and elegant way, is so that everyone does feel just so unique at every stage of that journey, and it just feels like this is just about me, which I think is obviously really great and really important.
Yeah, it's something we've been focused on for 5 years now, but the pandemic's only something that's stimulated demand exponentially, almost on steroids. But it's something we're very familiar with, something that we're very passionate about, is taking well-being from a nice to have in the workforce to a need to have. And I think delivering that at scale has been something that we've done with our enterprise customers, be it Deloitte or Helios or any of our enterprise customers. Now 25% of the workforce use Flare to be able to deliver personalized employee wellbeing journeys, which is a testament to the way that we've democratized those personalized employee journeys, but also kind of the impact that we've been able to have on working Australians. I think you guys have been doing that as well, Josh, for 10 years through various case studies of how do you kind of take digital tools and apply them to what previously was manual processes to provide access to resources, to engage employees, and using the words that you use, connect. Can you give us some examples of where you've done that?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of examples, and I mean, obviously, one of the clients who, I think might be a good one to sort of touch on over here, and I've got a quick little case study which I'll talk about over here, which is Cabrini Healthcare, and they're Victorian based, and this is their digital workplace or their intranet, their employee experience that everyone comes to over here, and it connects their head office staff right through across their network of their hospitals and medical centres, and this is for everyone from executive in the office right through to frontline healthcare workers and nurses. And I think the thing that's been really important is seeing the benefit and really valuable to us is seeing the benefit they've experienced, so that someone who's on the front line there who's never really had to deal with this can very easily get access to the information they need. And they may have been a nurse for 30 or 40 years and they've never had to use technology up until now, when there is so much compliance and so much information they need and processes they have to follow. So it's great to know that their experience can be better, where there's an easy way for them to do it without having to be so technical. And the same way from a head office perspective, where teams can communicate and collaborate, and when users are accessing it, the experience is personalized. And so Cabrini's got a lot of benefits there in terms of improving communication across the organization and reducing a lot of paper and implementing so many efficiencies, and really helping that staff retention there by making people feel that they've got a place to go to feel connected to the organization. Because if you're on the front line, you're really focused on what you're doing at the time. It's hard to get brought into the broader organization. And it's great to be able to deliver, an intranet for Cabrini like we've done there that has actually solved a lot of the challenges they've had, and had the benefit across their organization. And obviously, a great organization, great industry when they're providing healthcare, and that actually makes a difference in the patient's life as well.
Yeah.
I think we'll jump into some questions now. There's been a bunch coming through, so feel free to pop in any other questions over there, and I'm happy to go through those. I'll ask a few through to you.
Good.
Cool. So first one, I head up HR and I'm struggling to retain my employees who I'm often losing for lack of financially rewarding them. Are there any options that won't bust my budget?
Yeah, I love the language used, Josh. Bust my budget. It's great use of alliteration. Look, I think this is where the opportunity lies, in that we're living in an inflationary world that doesn't exist. There is no inflation, and so therefore it's really, really hard when you don't have the tool or the power of wage increases to drive retention. And at the same time, you've got 56%, as BCG said, of people looking for a new job. And so if I don't have the ability to pay more, which is the vast majority of workforces across the country, and I've got half my workforce actively looking elsewhere, how do I engage and retain? And so we can talk about recognition, but I also think recognition comes in the format of both intangible and tangible remuneration. And so on the REM side of things, there's a bunch of employee benefits that one can offer that engages around those four pillars of our vision and our values of physical, mental, social, and financial health and wealth. And so without incurring the notorious fringe benefits tax, there's a bunch of things that Flair's found that companies just aren't using as tools in those four pillars to really drive the engagement of employees and overall compensate for the recognition that might not exist in a fundamental pay rise. And so those things are like salary packaging, for example, where one can kind of earn or drive pay forward by almost $5,000 for every single employee across Australia, which is the equivalent at an average wage of $70,000. That's kind of more than a 5% pay bump that you otherwise couldn't get. And so that could be the salary packaging of work from home expenses. It could be the salary packaging of vehicle expenses. It could be laptops, phones. There's so many things that one is capable of salary packaging, but hasn't been democratized to the everyday Australian. So that's one tip that I would suggest in terms of avoiding the bust your budget kind of constraint in a non-inflationary world. The other is really around recognition on the intangible. So driving those four pillars of value to create social connectivity is so important. And so what we see over there, be it mental health or physical health, be it the social connection of how we're doing good for society, that's what kind of BCG found as that fifth pillar that was so important into this new aged world. And so if one can do that digitally in terms of recognition in those pillars, mental, physical, social, and financial, the value that that extracts as the individual retention level is so significant. And we've seen it in the data. The data exists that when that recognition happens, connected to those social, physical, mental pillars, right, that's when the magic of retention actually comes through.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points there, and obviously the question, yeah, you mentioned, bust your budget. I like that over there. I think you raised really good practical examples where people are wanting to implement something easily, quickly, probably quite cost effectively as well. And I think you've given some really good examples there and good benefits to the employees as well, which is obviously really important. There's another question that comes through here, which I might jump in and answer, which is how can our frontline employees get access to the internet so that they can access the info we need them to see? So I think that's a good question. I think, we think about engaging your frontline employees and remote workforce. Again, like I mentioned at the very beginning, it's often been something that everyone's forgotten about because they're in head office, and now that head office is also remote, they're thinking a lot more about their other team members. Everything can be accessed these days by mobile. So, it's a beautiful thing about it. So there's really easy ways to enable your frontline teams to securely access the information they need from mobile devices, which means you don't have to rely on them to go to a physical, be in an office, for example. But then there are great other examples we've got, and Cabrini is actually another awesome example of that, where you've got healthcare, you've got shared kiosks. There's often, in retail, for example, people have mobile devices. There might be a shared computer they use in the store or something like that. And so I think that's another great example where you can jump in there, make it really easy to access everything, whether it's on a kiosk, whether it's on a mobile device. So I think just because people are deskless, just because they're not in front of a physical computer, does not mean that you can no longer communicate with them and engage with them. They're just as accessible these days as the person sitting in an office on a computer there. Another question comes through, and Dan, I'll throw this one across to you, which is what's the best way to start implementing an employee rewards platform?
Yeah. The start is to define, I think start with those 4 pillars would be my statement. And mental, physical, social, or financial, you can be broken up into multiple subsections, but the notion is, what are we trying to achieve here? And what we're trying to do is, that is the starting point. What most organizations are trying to do, albeit that every organization has its own culture and its own unique piece of value that it wants to bring to the table, is to make sure we're starting with what success looks like. And if we're trying to drive employee engagement, are we trying to drive retention? Are we trying to drive productivity? So these are the ideas of starting with what does success look like, is where I would start in driving the rewards kind of system. After that, the tools, the technology, and the content can all follow. But one needs to start off with, what does success look like and what am I trying to achieve? After that, then we can go into kind of what are the right systems, what are the right content, and where do we kind of index between mental, physical, social, and financial health. But I think when it comes to it, first define what success looks like and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to that question. And actually, your answer, there's another question that's come through, and your answer is almost partially an answer to that other question as well, which is, how can we tell if our remote and frontline employees are actually engaging with the tools and solutions we provide them? And so, I think, the answer I'd sort of say to that one is to understand if they're accessing it. There's analytics in their data that's really important to make sure you're running those reports and seeing, do people log in? Do they access it? Do they download this information? A lot of that just raw data is really important, so you can work out whether they're accessing the tools and engaging, and what are they searching for and trying to find. But I think it's really important to pair it back to the point, Dan, you've just mentioned, which is, what was the goal and the reason and the strategy, and what were you trying to get to? Because that's the real way to measure success. Is not just, are they accessing this, but, are they accessing something and they're doing what you actually set out or intended them to do in the first place, to see whether what they're doing and the activities or the actions they're taking are successful.
I think that's right.
Achieve those boxes.
Yeah, I think that's right, Josh. I think, whether it be Elcom or Flare or another system that you use, or most systems these days have the analytics necessary for you to determine usage. I don't think that's the challenge, whether it's a fancy, cute dashboard or whether it be an Excel spreadsheet. The data's there. tracking usage is not the issue. It's that mentality of measuring success, which is far more important in terms of actually using the data that's available to you. And so I think, as Josh said, set out kind of what we're trying to achieve and then measure it using the tools and the analytics that are available through digital systems like Flare and Elcom. But it's critical that you set those goals and you measure them regularly, because what is measured can only be achieved.
Yeah, you said it perfect. I couldn't have said it better there to tie it all together. And I think that's actually an awesome point there, Dan, to end off on. And we're just about right on time. So, yeah, really appreciate you joining the webinar today, Dan, and been awesome for Elcom and Affair to co-present the webinar. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And hopefully you'll be able to gain some really good insights and great nuggets of information that you can quickly and easily and practically start implementing into your organization today.
Likewise, Josh, and if Flare or Elcom can help you at all on your digital journeys as partners and as prospective or existing customers, we'd love to do so at no charge. We really do want to democratize access to these digital tools and well-being to all Australians. And so if Josh, myself, or any of our teams can help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks,
Fantastic.
guys.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Cheers.